Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Penn Vicarage and a happy new year to you all. I hope you all had a lovely Christmas and great to see you again. And I hope you enjoyed the talks by my colleagues and friends over the last few days. Well, a couple of things for you. Firstly, now we're in the new year, just to reassure you, St. Bart's Church is now warm. So feel free to come back to worship again whenever you feel safe and ready to do so. It's nice and warm in there now. We haven't finished the system yet. That's yet to be completed, but we have heat in there. So it may be cold outside, but it's nice and warm in there. Anyway, so a warm welcome genuinely greets us at the beginning of this new year. Now, my friends, we are starting a new series today. We're looking at the Gospel of Matthew. As you know, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke and John all telling stories about the life of Jesus. Now, I've got a bit of a confession to make. Of all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, Matthew has always been to me, how shall we say, probably my least favourite. I find certain chapters really quite challenging, especially chapters 5, 6, 7, 23, 24 and 25, if you really want to know. But what I'm really looking forward to this is hitting it head on, going from beginning to end and really getting to grips with it. So it gets from here to here and I want to really get into it and really enjoy it. So we're starting Matthew today. As I say, I'm looking forward to really getting stuck into it. It should take us up to around about Easter and it's going to be great. Now, this morning's reading, we're looking at Matthew chapter 1, reading verses 1 to 17. And to advise you, please, if you are tempted at some point during this to turn off, please don't. Please keep going to the end. It's only 18 verses long, and you'll be glad you did. So, without further ado, Matthew chapter 1, starting to read at verse 1. An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. And Judah, the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez, the father of Hezron, and Hezron, the father of Aram, and Aram, the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon, the father of Salmon, and Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, Abijah, the father of Asaph, and Asaph, the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat, the father of Joram, and Joram, the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah, the father of Jotham, and Jotham, the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh, the father of Amos, Amos, the father of Josiah, and Josiah is the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salathiel, and Salathiel was the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Elihud, and Elihud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. And so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David to the deportation of Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation of Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, firstly, thank you for not turning off. Here we have an account of the genealogy, or a better translation is the genesis, the origin of Jesus Christ the Messiah. And on the face of it, it's just a list of names. It's a record of names, isn't it? But I want to bring out a couple of things. Firstly, a kind of an obvious point, and secondly, a kind of much more subtle and really interesting point. Firstly, this: in this genealogy, King David gets a high profile. You get 14 names from the beginning, Abraham, through to David. You get David to the deportation, the exile is 14 more. And from then to the present, to Jesus, is 14 more. And the word 14 is very important because in Hebrew there are no vowels, so DVD is code for the number 14. So it's quite interesting that you have, so David is code for 14 in the Hebrew. So you get 14, 14, 14. So what it's trying to get you to see is that Jesus, the Messiah, is not only descended from David, but the number of David is right and root and branch all the way through this, like a messaging through a stick of rock from beginning to end. So it wants you to see that David is the forerunner of Jesus, if you like, and that Jesus, as the prophet said, Jesus is from the seed, from the line of David. That's the kind of the obvious point. That's what I want you to see. But I think what's really interesting in this is not the men in this list here, because tucked in there are actually 5 women as well. And I think the women here are actually quite interesting, because it's interesting choices, because all these 5 women who are mentioned all have, shall we say, a degree of moral, a degree of moral we're not quite sure about. So, for example, we have Tamar at the beginning, who, after the death of her husband, covered her face and dressed herself as a prostitute in order to seduce her father-in-law. That's Tamar. And then we have Rahab, who was in Jericho and was a prostitute in Jericho. And we have Ruth, who was not only from the hated Moabite race, but she also had, how can we put this delicately, an interesting seductive technique in order to win over her future husband Boaz. And then, of course, there's Bathsheba, who, of course, was a married woman who had committed adultery with the king while her husband was out at the Russian front, so to speak. And finally, there's Mary. Now, you and I may know that, of course, Mary had Jesus by a virgin birth. But if you think about it, to other people around at the time, it may have looked rather different. They might not have believed her story about being the virgin birth, and it may have looked rather different to her. So Jesus' parentage may have looked a bit dodgy, and Mary may therefore have been thought of rather differently to the way we think of her today. So you have 5 women in this genealogy here, tucked in there, all of whom have a degree of moral, well, we're not quite sure, so interesting morality, shall we say. Now, a pious view of this would say that Jesus came to save such people, that, that sinners needed saving, and that Jesus came to save the likes of people like this. And I'm sure that's true. Jesus did come, Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, quite rightly too, including the people here. But what I think is interesting, that Jesus, in the genealogy here, God doesn't just save these people. They're not just hangers-on who get caught up in things. God actually used these people too. That actually Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary all had an absolutely vital role in the purposes of God. God saved them, but God did rather more than that. God actually used them as part of his purposes as well. So no one should be written off, and God can, and God does use the most unlikely people for his purposes. So we should never rule anybody out. So God didn't just send Jesus to save sinners. He actually wanted sinners like you and I to be part of God's purposes as well. But finally, I think these 5 women also show us something remarkable about faith. That faith is not simply a question of, remaining morally upright all the time. And it's not just a question of don't do this and don't do that. These 5 women also had remarkable characteristics in their faith as well. So Tamar, for example, while she may have all the other stuff, or dressing up as a prostitute and so on, she was also resourceful too. And actually, faith is about being resourceful. It's about like Jacob, another person with interesting morals, actually not being prepared to let go. And Tamar was prepared to be resourceful in her faith. That Rahab, yes, she was a prostitute in Jericho, but she also was incredibly brave. Some Israelite spies came in, and she got huge risk to herself. She gave them shelter. So she was remarkably brave. And then there's Ruth, who actually, despite, she may have been a Moabite, and she may have had an interesting seductive technique, but she also had remarkable loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi. An incredible example, where you go, I will go, and my God, your God will be my God, and her remarkable act of loyalty to her mother-in-law. And then there's Bathsheba, who may have been an adulteress, but actually she went on to become a great queen. And finally, of course, there's Mary, who, whatever it may have looked like to the outside, the chattering classes of Bethlehem and Nazareth, actually she said yes to God, and she gave birth to the Son of God. So these 5 women, who may have had interesting morality, actually demonstrate something really important to us about faith, which isn't just a question of don't do this and don't do that and being morally upright, you might say. That Tamar showed great resourcefulness, that Rahab showed great courage and bravery, that Ruth showed great stickability, that Bathsheba showed greatness when it came to she became a great queen, and Mary being prepared to say yes to God. So overall, in this looks like just a string of names, you've got that Jesus was descended quite clearly from the line of David, which is absolutely clear as our promise would be. But tucked away here, we have 5 interesting women who, as I say, were of interesting morality, all of them. But actually, all of them were saved by Jesus. But not just saved by Jesus, but actually used by God as part of his purposes. And that actually all of them demonstrate in their own way remarkable faith. And faith in God is not just about don't do this, don't do that, do the other. Faith is also about resourcefulness. It's also about courage and bravery. It's also about loyalty and stickability. It's also about being great in what you do, like Bathsheba was. And it's also about being prepared to say yes to God too. So it turns around, I think, what true faith in God is really all about. So you just thought it was a list of names, but I hope you find it much more interesting than that. Much more tomorrow. God bless you. Lovely to see you. Great to be back with you again. And Happy New Year to you all. And more tomorrow.